Morning, Frank.
Morning. Well,
Morning,
it's
Mr.
afternoon.
Kramer.
I'm excited to be on the first episode of this podcast with you guys.
Yeah, man. Hey, look, I got a feeling that what we do over the next several weeks, over the next year, everything's going to be all right. So I got a really good feeling about 2026, and I couldn't be more excited than to kick off this first episode of the Buy Side with Mr. Brian Kramer, who everybody in the industry seems to know you, Brian. Everybody knows what you're about, and everyone tends to listen to you because you always bring the fire whenever anyone's talking to you, whether it's one-on-one or in front of a crowd. So Todd and I are super pumped to have you on the show today. So welcome.
No, I'm privileged to be on here, and I know the three of us are aligned on most things, so this should be a good conversation. I got a few questions for you guys along the way.
Oh, you're gonna put us on the hot seat. I love it. So, the first things first, man. How were the holidays? How were the holidays for you, Todd?
Ate too much food, which is good, and spent a lot of great time with family. It was a blessing. That's all I can tell you. Holidays were definitely a blessing, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
What about you, Brian? I know you're down in sunny Florida while we're freezing up in the cold, but how was the holiday with the palm trees?
It was good. It's always good, especially if my daughter came down and family and all that sort of thing. But I would say that it was quickly over. And talking to all of our friends in retail, they don't get a lot of downtime right after the holiday, so they're right back at it. I know that a lot of them have been calling me for the last couple of weeks. I'm sure your phones are getting blown up. What's going on? What's happened? Everything prior to the holidays to what's happening right now in terms of used car values, the volatility, the shortage drying up, that sort of thing. I don't think a lot of people had time to, digest that after the holidays.
Brian, something that I want to bring up, right, that I think it's important as we get going here, and one of the reasons why I respect your opinion so much, and I think a lot of people in the industry do too, is your background, right? I mean, a lot of people just know you work for Cars Commerce, right? But I think it's important for people to understand your history in the car business, especially in retail, because I think that's what makes you so talented, doing what you're doing now for cars, and they were very wise to hire you because of your experience in retail. So the quick 60-second version, right, of your history in the car business, if you don't mind, for the people in the audience that may not know.
Yeah, so I spent 28 years in retail, pretty much every position in a dealership. I started off, right out of high school, and quickly moved up. I was a GM at 24, and then a few stores at 26, and left when I was 30 to go to public. I was working for the Germains in Ohio up until that point, and then left and went to AutoNation and ran a few dealerships for them. And then in 16, I went back to work for the Germains in Naples. Germain Toyota, and then we ended up acquiring the Lincoln store. We had the Big Lot used car dealership down there, and we sold about 7,000 cars a year.
So Brian, tell me about that. So you're 24, you're a GM, and I'm certain that at 24, like most, maybe it didn't go as smooth as you thought it might have went as that rookie GM. What was that experience like?
Oh no, of course it didn't. I'd just gone from a Taj Mahal Lexus dealership open point that we opened up a few days after September 11th, which was a whole nother experience. And when you immediately have, a couple $100,000 of water that you didn't have 2 days before, but once we turned that around, we became one of the top 3 dealerships in the central region quickly. Went down to we bought a Mercedes dealership, and I think I was the 5th GM in 18 months. Because it kept on churning. They're selling 12 new, 8 used. No F&I department. I don't think a lot of people even realize that's even a thing. I didn't. So when I went down there to go do the first deal, and I'm used to, they go, you're gonna have to spin them, deliver them, because there's no head count, right? You're gonna do it all.
Right.
And I saw the first car, and I said, where, give me some logins. And they're like, no, we don't have computers yet. And I go, what are you talking about? They said, well, here's how we do it. We give the business card to the customer. They go across the street to either Huntington, Key Bank, or Bank One, or Chase Bank, or whatever it was back then. And they get the financing. Then they come back with the draft. And I said, well, how do you spot deliver it? They're like, we can't spot deliver cars, or you got to wait till it's funded to be able to. And I've come to find out that's how it used to be before F&I departments.
Yeah.
And that's how people bought cars. But it was still like in a time warp, and everything was still pen and pencil. So changed that quickly, obviously. But yeah, explaining that to people that were, twice, 2 and 3 times my age, it was a challenge and a struggle. But we quickly, we got to 55 new and 35 used from, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you've only got like 12 parking spaces and they're double, triple parked,
Right.
It's a challenge. I had a union petition thrown on me a week into the job. So yeah, and we overcame it. But
yeah,
all those things now make everything else look easier. When you're talking about disruption, transformation, EVs, you're talking about tariffs, you're talking about all those things. Those of us that have gone through the Great Recession, that have gone through, COVID tactfully, but the recession even more.
9/11, $4 gas.
Right.
It goes on and on and on.
So we're more resilient as a result. Cash for clunkers, yes.
Yeah, cash for clunkers. There's always disruption in this business.
That's right.
And there always probably will be. History does have a habit of repeating itself, especially in the car business, right? Especially when we talk about the used car market. One thing I want to mention too, Brian, I think it's important as we really get into this conversation, why did you leave and go work for, let's call it quote unquote a vendor, a third party vendor, cars.com? Like what led you to go down that path from working for, a large private, a large public, going back to a large private, in Florida, right, to a publicly traded third party listing company in Chicago, Illinois? Like what led you to that?
Well, a couple people led me to that. Robert Holland said, and Alex Vetter.
Yeah.
And that took a minute, and there was a few things. One of them driving it was to be able to spend more time with my family, because I had been grinding, and I really hadn't come up for air. A lot of that was self-induced. But I also was intrigued and attracted about the opportunity to have an impact on changing the industry, because there's a lot of things that I don't like about the industry and the way we do things. And I think a lot of it is predicated on the technology that we have. And it's really, it's always been frustrating to me how things don't connect, they don't interact. And to be able to, obviously it's not fixed and there's still, light years to go, but to be able to have an impact on that and be able to accelerate that. And I honestly think that we're at a point where with Carvana, CarMax, the way they're sourcing cars, that if we don't proactively do something about this, that it's going to change the trajectory of everything about the way we currently know the franchise car business to be today. And I love this business and I don't want to see it go that way, right? And I think that there's a lot of things that we can do to combat that. And in talking to Alex Vetter when I was coming on board, to be able to, as he said, put a dent in the universe and change how people look at the car business today was appealing. I didn't realize what a project that would be, but it's still ongoing. But AI is going to unlock a lot of that for us. It's doing it right now.
So let me dive in. So let's get to some meat and potatoes. So one of the things you mentioned is you years ago, you walk into a dealership, there's very little, if no technology, and people are doing things in this way that it just blows your mind and you can't believe it's happening. So fast forward, and now we're in 2026, and it feels that way a little bit right now, doesn't it? Like we're walking into dealerships that are still using a lot of old technology in this modern space. So, one question I have for you: when you look back over the last few years, what is most surprising if you were to look now and say, look, I would have expected that in 2026 we wouldn't be doing X?
I would say that it's very surprising to me based on the mentors that taught me how to appraise cars back then. I mean, I think we all come from old school where the people were hard, and used car managers and auction, the buyers were they're tough people. They're resilient. They're gritty. They get their hands dirty. When you're I was in Columbus, Ohio, and you got to drive 6 hours to Manheim, Pennsylvania each way, and you come back possibly with no cars, right? Or one car after you're out of the office and you miss a whole day of retail as you're sitting there because everybody's paying crazy money, because I didn't understand best end user back then. And I was like, how are they doing this? I can't even get in the ring. And you come back and everybody's at home is waiting for you to have 2 truckloads of used car inventory to sell. And you come back with nothing. And they're like, what'd you do all day? You're just sitting there eating hot dogs and peanuts. But those people that knew
French fries, man, right? The French fry shack out back. You know exactly what I'm talking about.
I do. Oh my God. And I miss that too, because there's no live cars anymore. And you got to go to Mecum or Barrett Jackson to see a live auction. But so all those things that people knew about the business and checking, for paint, checking for scoring on the screws, and all the art form of an appraisal have been lost, because what's fascinating to me is how much pushback there was to adopt vAuto and other appraisal tools. And now people believe metrics without even being curious about how are these things calculated? How did they come to be? And everything's a guide, including AccuTrade, right?
Yeah.
And it gives you signals, but nothing is religion. And when people use MMR or certain indices as like the gospel, knowing that there's other data points out there, that's fascinating to me. It's also fascinating to me how there's not enough old souls, let's say, that know how all those values are calculated. And in most of the groups that I talk to, I'm pretty much all of them, especially the big publics, the average used car manager has been in the seat less than 3 years, and most of them have not been in the seat prior to COVID. And all the used car managers, directors that were in the seat prior to COVID are, back to the Great Recession, are now GMs. So they're the ones that had to feel that pain. But a lot of the existing used car managers haven't felt a real painful moment like the Great Recession. Yet they trust these signals blindly instead of being curious and asking more questions. That's the first thing, is the valuations and the data piece. The second piece that fascinates me is the lack of execution in the showroom. Once, the customer comes in, with the customer present, actually, touching the car, sticking the tires, the amount of loss and gross evaporation that I see occurring because people don't use a tread depth gauge. They don't use an OBD, and they don't focus on blocking and tackling at the basic level. I mean, I want to accelerate the process as fast as humanly possible, but there's 2 things where you have to slow down big time. In the F&I process, after you do the interview, when you're doing the menu presentation, that to me is a sacred moment. You can't mess with that. And you can't mess with the appraisal. You can't get interrupted. You can't be multitasking. That's something you got to be completely focused on the same way 100% of the time with 100% of the customers. And I see people shortcutting that all the time and trying to go with all these other easy ways. Hey, what if we did this? Or what if we changed our pricing? Or what if, and the reality is, if you want to make more gross, it's not going to come from some, silver bullet auction that, source that you found that nobody else found out, or some buy center. It comes from what happens when the customer's there, with the appraisal face to face, shoulder to shoulder.
Brian, I agree with you 1,000%. And I'll add one more thing too that gets rushed. The demo ride, right? Like people just, they've already driven one of those before. Like you get all these excuses why the customer didn't go on a demo ride, or they just sat out in the car in the parking lot and they didn't drive it. And that to me was always when I owned stores and I was sitting at the desk and I'd be like, what are you doing? Right? Like, you didn't even grab a plate. They didn't even go for a ride. Well, they've already driven one. They drove one at another dealership. It doesn't matter whether it's a new car or a used car. And the other thing too, in regards to the appraisal process, I'm a firm believer. And when I own dealerships, this was the way we did it. And then when I do work with other dealerships now, consulting and train on appraisals, I think it's really important to have the customer involved in the appraisal process itself. It should not be some blind process where some mystery guy who sits at a desk behind glass somewhere with a bunch of stuff written all over the windows, right? All of a sudden, he or she gets your keys and you're sitting at your desk, fumbling around, looking at your phone while some person is actually out sitting in the car that you own, right? That's your car with your personal stuff in it, and just basically picking it apart, right? Like, I think it's so important that the customer has complete and 100% involvement in the appraisal process for 1,000 different reasons. We could probably talk all about that for the time that we're talking about it, but I agree with you 1,000%. It gets rushed. When things get rushed in a showroom, costs you deals, it costs you gross, and you lose trust completely with the customer when people get rushed. And sometimes you got to slow customers down. They may want to rush, but you got to slow them down because you know what? They're spending a lot of money.
What the Carvana guy told me the other day, I sold my vehicle to Carvana, and it was a little bit more, but not a lot more, not enough to justify doing it. But I was super curious. I talked to Frank about, what that process was like for CarMax, Carvana. And so kind of like how you posted the other day, Todd, you said, I'm in the showroom, and instead of taking everybody else's word for it, I wanted to go to the dealership and see for myself what they're dealing with today. And I'm of the same religion, right? So I wanted to also put myself in that same situation. I want to see what's the Carvana process really like, not what I heard it's like. And it was fascinating that, and I recorded the guy and we'll be posting it here soon. But as I'm interviewing him, he was very nonchalant, but he was also very transparent about the mistakes that they've made and what they've learned from them. And I think that franchise dealers overall will tend to cling to ideas that, well, they're doing this and that's a unique situation. Carvana really is great at tuning out the noise. Yeah. Like with tag and title. They got blasted. They got turned off in certain states. They had the media against them. Everything, every reason for a dealer principal to say, that's enough. We're done with this little project. We can't do tag and title, but that's not what they did. And now they're the best in the United States at tag and title, by far, light years ahead of anybody else. And I think there's not enough of that. I think that dealers need to not worry about the noise in order to get better. That's how at Germain Toyota, when we went paperless, we did 16,000 transactions in 2 years. How did we do it? We went through a lot of pain and a lot of spears thrown at me, a lot of internal hate. Rick Germain saying, Brian, is this even worth it? How much are you making any money from this? Why do you have to go paperless so bad? Why does it have to be so digital? Is it worth it to you? Because everybody's looking at what I'm going through. I've got internal critique, external critique, everybody telling me it's never going to work. And it did, but it takes a lot of mental fortitude.
Well, and a lot of that, and I'm glad you mentioned Carvana because, I went through that process as well. I think I shared with you, Brian, at one point that, I bought in the last year, I bought 2 cars and sold 2 cars to Carvana. And I was a bit intentional with that because I wanted to go through the experience that everyone, from the outside looking in has told me it's flawed. It doesn't work. And look, I'll be honest. I had a beautiful, beautiful experience selling 2 cars and buying 2 cars from Carvana. And you're right when you say that, so many dealers will walk away from something because they had a few problems rather than dig into it. I remember years ago when CarMax was buying a bunch of cars with open recalls, and we got blasted by the media for open recalls. But what people didn't see from the outside looking in is that we had very deliberate, intentional processes around making sure that the customer was aware of the recall, making sure that we showed them all the paperwork on the recall, and we were still able to sell those cars. So I guess that leads me to another question for you. Like, you're in dealerships every week. I know you said, when you were when you were working in the dealerships, you were head down and you were in and you didn't see your family a lot, but I see your videos. I see you on the road all the time. I know you're working and on the road constantly, not seeing your family a lot now as well. So I know that this question you have a great answer for, which is why I can ask it. And that is, when you're in dealerships, from your experience, when you talk about acquisitions, you talk about the buy side of things. what breaks down first? Is it the people? Is it the process? Is it the leadership? Is it how they're pricing cars? Like, what are you seeing across the country that stops dealers in their tracks because it's the first thing that breaks?
Man, that's a heavy question. So the first thing that I see often is risk aversion. And it's intentionally designed this way. I designed it like that. Like I was in retail to have a separate used car department, new car department with separate pay plans, paid on different buckets of gross, right? But what you encourage when you do that is you encourage the used car department to not be emotionally connected to the same goals as the new car department. So they're looking at it as an asset. And I do think a used car is worth what it's worth. That's a different conversation. But I also know that a lot of used car managers have their own biases. I did. And they sit there and they look at a Land Rover or a Range Rover Defender that's just out of, or a Range Rover, let's say a P530 that's just out of warranty. And those things, they seep, they leak, and everybody knows it. Anybody who, appraises those things. So they're going to hold back a little bit because they haven't run an OBD on it, or they don't know for sure, or they haven't looked underneath the seat. And there's a characteristic on that on every single car. Does 2011 and 12 RX 350s have sludge? Well, I'm going to hold back a little bit on that just in case, or maybe a Rogue, Murano. And when you're doing that, you're not, what if it doesn't have that, right? So what I've noticed with the Carvanas and the CarMaxes of the world is they give the customer the benefit of the doubt instead of the other way around. Yeah. And what it comes from dealers trying to protect themselves. But then what happens is they give the number to the new car department. The new car department then holds back on top of that held back number. So now you got two under allowances, not just one. And everybody's going to defend. Well, if you look at my statement and you look and see how much I held back on trades last month, I average $800 a car, but they're not looking at the fact that they're only winning a trade on 3 or 4 out of 10 of their transactions. So not measuring that number is where it begins. But I think that if I was to sum it up, because that's such a powerful question, not everybody, and I don't care who you are, is the best end user for every single vehicle. I used to think I was, and it cost me a lot of money learning that mistake in PVR, because I still sold a lot of cars, but I didn't sell them as profitably as I should have.
Right.
When you think you are, but you're not, you're either putting too little or too much in the car, and either way, that's a mistake. If you aren't the best to handle high mileage, late model vehicles, prior rental cars, all the different nuanced used car, sections segments that you have, if you're not the best at having an F&I department that has an outlet to sell those, you're not going to put as much in those vehicles. You're not going to be comfortable winning them. But the single biggest thing that I see, to answer your question, is I see a lack of confidence, to what Todd said, that they don't believe that their people are going to go out with the customer and appraise the car when they come in. So on sight unseen appraisals, they get really conservative, because when I tell them, I go, well, all you have to do is verify when you come in. Yeah, but I don't know that that's going to happen 100% of the time. We get busy, we get this. And what's fascinating to me is, why would you, I'll give it, used car managers are, besides service advisors, are the busiest people in the dealership. But why you have to forfeit something. And we know that not every salesperson is making every call. We're not doing as thorough one-on-ones as we should be doing. We're not interviewing, recruiting, holding people accountable, doing corrective actions, performance improvement plans, all that stuff. And it gets, recon. But I see used car managers getting sucked into this task mindset instead of a people mindset. And by not spending time with the customers, you also, or by not delegating and letting other people do the first 80% of appraisal, you don't have time to do all those things. So what do? They shortcut appraisals. They don't go out there and look at them. They don't stick the tires. They don't check for paint. They just look at a Carfax. They don't
drive it.
They don't drive the car.
They don't drive the car, or they'll put it in gear, put it in reverse, put it in drive. The air blows cold, go back inside.
And what's fascinating to me, Todd, is that when I sold that car to Carvana, I was expecting a sloppy in person, right? That I would just flip the keys to the guy. And it wasn't like that at all. It was a 30-minute appraisal, 25. And he had to drive it. And he goes, "You want to ride with me?" And I said, "No." He goes, "Are you sure?" But he didn't miss a step. And I sat there and I looked at it and I go, you know what? That's an old school appraisal, what he's doing. I mean,
That's
he
right.
went thoroughly and took me all around the car with him and showing me why this, pulling up my second row seats and flipping this down to make sure this works. I'm like, why are you doing that? Well, here's the reason why. And there was a reason for everything, right?
Yeah.
And
You know why? Because they got burned. When they first started buying cars from the public, they got
he said they're
burned
buying stolen cars and
so bad. Like they really learned the hard way. But they had public money to learn their mistakes, right? They had the market to help teach them because of their market cap. And they 100% learned. Now, let me ask you another question. And I heard this, and I don't know if it's true or not, but do they, they write you a check on the spot, but isn't it a draft? Like once they take it back and inspect it mechanically, it's a draft now, right?
yes.
So that, and a lot of people don't know that. Everybody thinks, oh, they just cut customer check and it is what it is. It's not the case. And
And
I
there's
was right.
business days to clear.
Yeah. So there's a reason.
CarMax is the same way. CarMax says the exact same thing. Even when you're in the store, it's still a draft.
So tell everybody what that means, because I didn't used to know what that meant.
The check won't clear. It's real simple, right? If you give them a car with a mechanical problem that this inspector that inspected your car for 30 minutes, he puts it up in the air and finds frame damage, right? Or finds anything major mechanical potentially wrong with it, your check won't clear. They're probably going to renegotiate with you or bring your car back. That's my guess, right? And you're
No,
probably
that is literally, you just laid out the process, Todd, that he told me. He
Yeah.
said, I got to get this car over here because tomorrow it's going to the Hollywood Recon Center, and it's going to go through the full to determine if we're going to retail it or we're going to wholesale it. And that is what that is. They have 24 hours internally to cycle through that step, and it's while the draft is still lingering.
But at a car dealership, right, a traditional newer used car dealership, it's not the way it works. Once you drive away in the car, right, and you get your car that you traded, or if you just sold your car to the dealership, that doesn't necessarily happen. And in some dealerships, unfortunately, that have recon issues that are backed up in recon, which we know happens in a lot of places, that used car doesn't get looked at for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So by then it's too late. And they're like, oh, we got burnt on one of those Land Rovers like you're talking about. Well, part of the reason why, let's look back at how long it actually took to get the car up in the air, to have somebody actually drive it and see all those leaks underneath it that you're talking about. So they have it down pat. I think that there's a ton of learning from that. There's a lot of learnings from that. So I'm going to shift the conversation just a little bit, Frank, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Right? We're 30 minutes in here, right? I want to talk about 2026, right? Because I've got some very strong feelings as to how I think this year is going to be. And I think this is going to be the year of the used car. Not that it usually typically isn't, but I think that this year especially is going to be the year of the used car, because this word affordability is what we're seeing and hearing about now more than ever. And I think that the consumer's stretched, as we know. New cars, the average new car payment's what, $750 a month, right?
That the average new car payment $977.
Yeah.
So I mean, you hear all these different numbers, and I don't know. I know the reality is this, right? New cars are really expensive. The average price of a new car is like 50 G's or more, right? So it's expensive. Interest rates are still low, but not low enough. And new cars are expensive, and used cars are going to be the way to go for people. I also know that there's a lot of people that still have not bought a car over the last few years because they just couldn't for a variety of reasons. I think that, tax returns are going to be really strong this year. I hear a lot of really smart people saying that this is going to be one of the best years ever for tax returns. And because of that, I think the used car market wholesale is going to be very strong. And I think it's going to be a great year for used cars. I'd love to hear both of your opinions on what I just said.
I'll let you go first, Frank.
Yeah. So look, I think the year's going to be strong, but I think it's going to be very challenging. I think it's going to be strong because I think consumer demand is going to pick up. I think last year was a little bit of a tougher year. I think, with the election and coming out of the election, I think a lot of people got really excited for what 2025 was going to do. And then that didn't necessarily happen for so many, right? Like we knew in unemployment numbers, I think were, somewhat flat for the most part. But what we saw was that, that there wasn't this infusion into the economy that we thought that there would be, right? And if you look at the jobs numbers for the entire year, right, like there wasn't all of a sudden this huge lift in terms of job. I think in December, I think we added 50,000 jobs or something like that. But over the year, I think we added maybe 500,000 jobs, if I'm not mistaken. So all of those things lead me down 2026 of being this year where, hey, you're potentially going to see interest rates cuts. You potentially see higher tax returns. Who knows if there's some sort of stimulus in there? All of these things, I think, lead people down that path that, you know what, I've been sitting on the sidelines and now I'm ready to get in the game and buy used cars. The problem that we're still faced with is there's just not a lot of used cars out there. And I do believe that there's still a shortage of inventory.
Of the right inventory.
Of the right inventory, right? Like
100%.
this year, you're going to see inventory numbers and they're going to creep up because there's going to be, you know, roughly 300,000 EVs coming off lease. And so it's going to look like, oh, we have all these cars in the market, but is the EV market truly there right now? So all of those things I think are going to make it tough for the buyer, for you to go out and acquire inventory is going to get tougher. And so it's got to be done with precision and it's got to be done with intentionality. And that's what I think is going to hurt a number of dealers this year, is not having the discipline to go out there and acquire inventory the way that it needs to be acquired. And I think, you know, and I'll be honest, what I've seen more people start to lean towards is this mentality that AI is going to do it, right? And we know, I think, Brian, you quoted at one point that you can speak to Carvana. They use, you know, they acquired about 60% of their cars with AI, right?
Yep.
That's 60%. And of those 60%, there was still a human in the loop that still had to go and look at that inventory and buy that inventory and make sure that it stood up right. So
I just went through that. I'm part of the 60%. And then that other person is the last mile.
Exactly. So to answer your question, Todd, look, I think it's gonna be an up year. I think the year is going to be great in terms of the demand around used cars. I just think it's going to be really, really tough. And the dealers that are not disciplined are going to get pinched. That's my opinion. I'll turn it over to you, Brian. What's your thoughts?
Well, I know from just buying a car for my daughter and from selling a car, and I use ChatGPT for both because I wanted to be able to see what happens and I wanted to look at it through the consumer's lens. What does that customer experience look like? I think that we're for the first time ever in history coming out of a world where the consumer journey starts on Google and it's very linear and it goes to the dealer's website and it's that simple. It's become much more complex. And as I talk to dealers, I hear, and I'm sure you guys hear the same thing, I hear just two different camps. The first one is I can't get enough cars. I need to sell more cars. Inventory's tight. If I had another 100 cars, I could sell them tomorrow. And then I've got the other camp that are saying it's like somebody shut the faucet off and I don't understand what's happening. And there's more of those than there is of the first camp. And the reality is this: with AI search, it's not so much with Google because SEO doesn't work like that, but AEO, answer engine optimization, and GEO, generative engine optimization, work much differently. For instance, as I'm looking for a car for my daughter, I'm looking, she wanted to get a pickup truck. She plays softball. She wants to throw it in the back. So I want mid-sized trucks, looking at used, and then, but I need to be, $500 a month. So then I start throwing in leases, and it's doing what a salesperson normally would do for me and giving me different options. But the most important part after the selection, which that's the easy part, because when you're looking for used, to Todd's point, if you're looking for vehicles under 25 grand, this is how my wife's friends look for cars. I'm looking for a mid-size SUV with less than 70,000 miles from $15,000 to $25,000. What should I be looking at? And then AI takes it from there. But what happens is it's recommending dealers that have good reviews. It recommends dealers that have, I'll just touch on this. Their merchandising is tight. They're pointing out blemishes online ahead of time. So their trust rating goes up. They have 2 keys in the photos, and all this stuff sounds like minutia, but this is the future in the next 10 years of, if you want to get traffic and VDP conversion, You need to have 1 to 3 chips, dings, scratches, and point them out transparently and not be afraid of, well, I'll deal with that when they get here. That's the opposite. And if you're not putting anything in there, or you only have 1 key, that's a wash. If you have no keys in the pictures, which most people don't, that's a 1.5 deduct on the algorithm. And there's a ton of things like this, that the lighting, the resolution. And as I'm talking to a lot of my friends, they're like, man, I can't figure out why this car is not selling. And I start going through and researching it and going down that rabbit hole. And I come to find out that price is not even in the top 10 of why all these cars aren't selling. They need to retake their photos, because the metadata in the photos, that determines the age of the vehicle. But the same thing happens on the buy side. And this is where I see it really, where, Todd, to answer your question, to really change, dealers need to change their mindset, and it's long overdue, but this is like a red alert that needs to happen. They need to quit looking at under allowances and stealing trades as a profit center. That's the price of admission, and that's where the customer originates. You get 22 million unique visitors a month on Carvana's website. That's how many, and most of those are bouncing from a dealer's website because they couldn't get a number. So they're going there just to find it. That's where in 2026, the customer journey starts at the trade and then goes down and then goes to selection. It's never been like that before. It's always been select a vehicle. What's my trade worth? What's my payment? But today it's what's my trade worth? What can I afford? What should I select? It's an inverse funnel for the first time ever. And every dealer needs to come up with an acquisition strategy. And you should spend more time pricing your acquisition strategy than you do pricing your aged inventory.
Yeah. So Brian, what would you say to a dealer going with, since you mentioned the website and it's starting with the buying and the acquisition side of things, what would you say to any dealers out there that are listening that don't have some sort of a widget on their website that, you go to their website, or either you can't find how to value your trade, or there is a page that says, hey, call in to value your trade, call and talk to so-and-so. What's your thoughts around that?
The two worst things that you could have on your website, or any CTA, call to action button at all, is call for price, call for details. Those are the biggest hammers. I mean, sledgehammers that Google, Gemini, Chat GPT will just hammer you on. That you could not do anything worse than that. Besides, pricing includes must have a trade, must finance to qualify, those sorts of things. Those are also any dealer, and I'm just saying it, right? Because it's been one of these little tiptoe around type deals. October 26th, Google already started penalizing you. So if you're one of the dealers that says, oh, it's like somebody shut the faucet off, that's probably why. Look at your merchandising comments, and it's either going to say must trade in your default merchandising text that goes into every single vehicle, must finance to for this price to apply, must qualify for these 5 rebates that all are not stackable, or call for details, call for best price. And some of you are not even malicious, because you're saying any other questions, please call for details. But Google is still going to bring the hammer down on you, and you will be invisible on AI-based search on that unit. Demos, it's just the sloppiness, right? Google ranks you on expertise. Are you an expert? Are you good at what you do? Are you the authority? When you have 4 or 5 CTAs, which many dealers do on the website, and they think, well, it's like lendingtree.com. They can compete and I win because the vendors lose. The reality is everybody loses. The customer, the dealer, the vendors. And here's the reason why. Obviously, I'm biased for AccuTrade, but even if you don't have AccuTrade, just have one CTA that's consistent across it. Because if not, you're confusing the AI bots, which also, for the first time in history, last month, there was more internet traffic from bots and agents than there was from humans. And it's never going to go back below that ever again. So you're now appealing to bots and agents with your website. And when you confuse them with all these different things, it's like, nope, that's too complicated, move on. And it takes place in a millisecond. Odometers, if you have demos, if you have grounded General Motors, CT or Stellantis CTP cars, or whatever they call them when they're pulling out the program cars in General Motors or Ford, 2,000-3,000 miles. If that odometer, when the photo guy takes the picture, says 3,000 miles, but you still have from your DMS 15 miles in the system, invisible. And it's like, okay, yep, this is, if you don't have the VIN plate, a picture of that for it to be able to match for authenticity, invisible. All these things that so many people don't do or don't think about. I just want to get this thing online. 3 pictures and not 5, you're invisible. VLAs won't fire. And
yeah, it's almost like dealers are checking the box, right? Like they go through this process, they want to get the car listed online, they don't know some of this information, and that's why, you know, Todd and I launched this show, The Buy Side, is because we want to get real about things in 2026. Like, we don't want to tiptoe around these issues that we know are hurting dealers out there, and they're not quite sure where to go for the answers. And, you know, look, people will ask the question regularly of any one of us, what could they do differently? And in a space where we're seeing inventory is going to be a little bit scarce still, the right inventory, right? We know that processes in the stores that you visit, Todd visit, I visit, processes are broken. And we know that what's coming down the pipe is, you know, look, it's always predictable going into this time of year that you're going to go into tax season and you're going to see a bit of margin compression. And so the tendency there is that
the margin compression is self-induced.
Yep.
It is self-induced. And that takes me to my next question for you, is that because you're seeing some of this stuff happen out there and dealers are going out there, and you talked about holdbacks, you talked about dealers under allowance. Like, what's the most dangerous metric that a dealer will look at to justify when they're trying to acquire a piece of inventory, in your opinion?
Look the book. And everybody uses it as a shield. And they all say, don't worry about me. I'm at a 55% or I'm at a 60% look the book. I'm good.
And
I got a lot of comments about
I guess, you know, and I know, Brian, like you and I have talked about look the book, and we've talked about how that number can be manipulated. And it amazes me that, you know, no matter how many times I talk about it, you talk about it, Todd talks about it, the industry knows that this metric is flawed, but we still rely on that metric to help determine if we're having success. I'll kick it over to you, Todd, and ask you,
I'm waiting.
What's your opinion on that? What's your opinion on the most dangerous metric that's out there that dealers are using when it comes to acquisition?
Let's get back to what Brian said. Look the book, right? Like, it's not just a number, right? I mean, it's look the book, number one. Look the book by source, right? And are you actually tracking it on every single appraisal? And are you doing it properly? You have to know what look to book is by source, by appraiser, by salesperson. And it's got to be tracked, and it's got to be done every single time. And it's not hard to do. And I don't care what tool you're using to appraise a car, it's all right there. It's got to be done every single time. That's number one. When I look to book, I also like to have another window opened up and another monitor, and I like to look in CRM. The mistrade report and these other reports that show you VINs that you've looked at that you haven't actually gotten that car for whatever reason, right? I always, when I work with dealers and I train them and I teach them, I'm like, you can't just look at the mistrade report and be like, oh, we didn't put enough money in that car. Because a lot of times it's not about you putting enough money in a car. It could be 10 other different things. Number one, are there actually notes in the CRM that show what actually happened when the customer was in the showroom? Is there any follow-up after that? Are there accurate notes?
What value was on the sales menu?
Yeah.
Versus the ACV.
Yeah. And then the desk, right? Did you look at the pencil on the deal and see where you worked the customer? Did you under allow? Where did you let them out at? Another thing too is, not so much now, but during COVID, a lot of dealers just didn't have the car that the customer wanted, right? They may have come in and wanted a RAV4. You couldn't get them a couple of years ago during COVID. So look the books were just completely screwed up. There's no other word to look at it other than that. So they went and bought a Tucson or a Santa Fe or an Equinox or something else because they just had to have a car, right? Because you couldn't get a RAV4. But now that's not the case, right? There's no shortage of new cars anymore. So we're going back to the traditional metrics of of look to book, but a lot of it, in my opinion, is showroom execution too, because showroom execution has a huge effect on look to book. So it's not just about like, did I put enough money in these trades? Was I under allowing? And the other thing I'll mention about look to book too that's really important is, are you looking at look to book on sight unseen when we look at source? And is it sight unseen on a new car, or is it sight unseen on a used car?
And why is that important?
Well, why is that important, right? That's so important, because if you don't offer a customer all the money on a sight unseen appraisal, you will never, ever, ever see or hear from that customer again. I don't care. You can have the best BDC in the world. You can have the best AI to follow up with customers. If you under allowed them $2,000 on their car, and I don't care if it's a 150,000 mile car that's worth, $4,000, but your trade tool's set up to just basically hit those people at $2,000, or if it's a $50,000 car and you just offer them the wrong money, or you're just trying to under allow in general, because I don't want to offer them too much money for the car because I can't see it. I hear that all the time. It drives me crazy. You need to offer them all the money, because CarMax is going to do it. Carvana is going to do it. Another really sharp newer used car dealer that's in your town, or even 5,000 miles away or 500 miles away, they're going to do it. So you've got to offer customers all the money and encourage them to send you photos, send you videos. You need to have a trade-in tool, whether it's AccuTrade that you sell or AutoAcquire or whatever tool it is, to allow a customer to upload photos, send a video, so you can actually see the car and encourage it, right? And
what's the trend you see between new and used, Todd? That's what the thread I want to pull on. When the same dealership, why would you want to track it between new and used?
Oh, for 1,000 reasons, right? Like, so first of all, I like to look to book by source, and if it's a new car trade or a used car trade, because sometimes at the end of the month, we're just trying to make some new car deals in order to hit our number, right? So if you see a bunch of cars that you put too much money in on the 29th or the 30th of the month, and you put $1,000 too much in it, or $2,000 too much in it, and now it's water. Well, the reason why is, geez, we were trying to hit our number for Nissan, or we were trying to hit our number for CDJR in order to get to the end of the month, because we've got back our EBE money, our SFE money, or whatever. So like, that's super important. But a lot of dealers, they don't look at it that way. They don't track it that way. And then they're wondering why they have a bunch of water. And then the worst part about it is, they go and price those cars that they put too much money in at cost up, rather than what it should be on the market on day one. And then they're wondering why they got overaged inventory and they're blowing a bunch of money retail or wholesale. So we could talk forever about all
I used to hear in my dealership, is it a new car deal or a used car deal, from the used car director? And I would say, wait, whoa, why does that matter?
Why does it matter?
Because I'm just camped out at this used car desk. Well, I mean, and you would see a different trend, that they would not hold back as much on a used car deal. If they're trying to put a used car retail deal together, they would be stronger and more realistic and a lot more surgical on that used car appraisal, versus it's out of sight, out of mind. The new car desk is going to bump me anyway. You might as well, let's just, start them somewhere. It's like, and they looked at it like a first pencil strategy.
Yeah. And look, so many topics, and Brian, we definitely want to have you back onto the show, because we've only just started to dig in here and we're almost out of time. But, a couple more things as we close out this episode that I do want to touch on. And, you both mentioned that look to book is a flawed number. It's a metric that can get dealers in trouble. I remember years ago at CarMax, one of the first stores that I managed was in Schaumburg, Illinois, one of the higher volume stores, the highest volume store in Chicago. And we would do somewhere around 3,000 appraisals a month and sell 600 cars. And so when you hear those numbers, how do you think about that in terms of the average dealer? I know that you've mentioned several times that, hey, you really should be 2 to 1 of what you sell versus what you appraise. What do you think? Why does that scare dealers, and why doesn't that happen? Right? Like, when I look at, my time at CarMax and doing that many appraisals, I mean, we do 150 appraisals on a Saturday and still sell 50 cars. So we were running at 3 to 1 most days. But it never scared us, because we knew that, hey, we were going to set ourselves up to buy some cars. But why do you think dealers are, get a little fearful when we talk about that 2 to 1 or if you're really, really good at it, 3-to-1 number.
Well, I'll tell you clearly, I lived it. So Robert Holland said when he first started mentoring me, he said, if you appraise more cars, if you gave more appraisal numbers, you would, how did he say it? If you wholesaled more cars, you would retail more cars. And I said, Bob, I'm no mathematician, but if I wholesale more cars, that means I retail less. And he said, no, you're looking at it like on just like a linear plane. And I didn't really understand what he was saying at the moment. But what he was really saying is you should be appraising everything and you should be taking in more trades so that you can wholesale anything you want and just keep the ones that are desirable. And he said, if you're great at acquisition, you don't ever have to worry about aging inventory because you're only keeping the cars that are desirable and you wholesale everything else. And people are going to pay that because not everybody's good at sourcing cars. So we started at that time. I talked to him. We were selling, 500 cars a month, and we were taking in, we were appraising about 350 cars a month. So retailing 500, new and used, and appraising 350. Very quickly, over the course of 18 months, we went to 1,300 appraisals, and we started selling over 600 cars a month. But what happened that I didn't anticipate, a couple things. Our gross went up 30%. And I'm talking on the front. Our volume went up 20% in used, in addition to the new car volume. Our wholesale went to it was like $5 million. But that was in COVID, so it's different, right? But here's the point. Now there was a lot of other people that were starting to ask a lot of questions, and they're saying, hey, your look to book is overall was 34%. So then I started getting every quarter, at the end of the year, the corporate used car director, and I see this happen in all big groups. They come in, hey, what if you were at a 50% look to book? Well, hold on, because I go back to what Todd just said. I'm at 18% look to book on service drive appraisals. I'm at 20% on sight unseen appraisals. And that's probably, 70% of this. So if you take those out, I'm at 53% look to book in the showroom, right? And they go, no, you're not hearing me. My pay plan's based on 50% look to book by rooftop. You're costing me a lot of money. How do we get your store to a 50% look to book? And I looked at it just like how they used to hammer me about the closing ratio. Hey, the store down the street is at 40% close. I'm like, that's bullshit. Right. And
all they're doing is playing with the CRM. That's all they're doing.
Yeah.
Right. And I would have it fixed in a week. Right. And I said, you want to be at 50%? I'll have you at 50% in a week. But that's stupid because I can't hit those customers with retargeting ads. I don't have the data. I can't do save a deal meetings. I can't do all the things that got us all that lift to be able to do it. And then everybody's going to be afraid and they're going to start cherry picking the customers in the service drive. Because the real reality of the service drive is you appraise on intent, not on equity. And somebody has equity, so what? Only 11% of the people of the 1,500 cars I would acquire a year off the service drive, and that's a lot. 1,500 cars a year we would acquire, 11% of them had equity. Everybody else had negative equity or cars paid off. So what's the point? Now, all we did is walked up to customers, hey, if the numbers made sense and we paid you more than the market says, would you consider selling us your car? If yes, then we did appraise it. If no, move on, because there's not enough time. And that's the same philosophy you have to have with sight unseen appraisals, with everything, is not get bogged down in the weeds. That's what CarMax Carvana do. They're just giving information, law of reciprocity, then they come back around. But most dealers want to get real surgical and want to get precise. And what I've seen in my own dealerships is everybody would sit there and try to orchestrate and over engineer and go into surgery before we'd even diagnose the patient. Hey, what would the payment be on this? They put this much money down. And what we found out is that 50 or 55% of the customers don't even want the car they're in. They don't want the same payments with little or no money down at a similar payment. They want a completely different vehicle.
They want to upgrade.
And they just want to know what their trade's worth.
Yeah. More times than not, they want to upgrade. And so when you think about that, I hear that number and you said, hey, look, we were 34%.
But I caught a lot of heat for that, Frank.
Well, and here's a difference, and this is what I would say to all of our listeners is that Brian caught heat for 34% look to book, right? Which
a lot where a lot of my managers are like, Brian, why are you digging in? Just stop.
stop.
You know, they're like, you're making, and Frank, here is the answer. They go, you're making a lot of money. I'm making a lot of money. Why are we kicking this hornet's nest? How much less money are we going to make if we just do what they want us to do?
And so
I said,
and
it was nothing. It was negligible.
And it comes full circle to at CarMax at 34%, you're celebrated. And that's where the big difference. You and I were in stores at the exact same time, hearing very different messages about acquisitions. And so when you look at everything, and as we come full circle at the end of our show here, and we talk about the buy side and what we want to help dealers with in 2026, and I'm going to start with Todd first. If you could give a couple of pieces of advice to operators as we move through 2026, what do they need to rethink immediately, and what advice would you give them?
Let's start with a couple things that Brian talked about. Merchandising, number one, right? Like merchandising is so important on the lot and online, like real merchandising. Look at the people out there that are best in class and do exactly what they're doing. Point out the defects, take great pictures, right? Invest in a place to take photographs of cars at dealerships. Don't get me wrong. I love this AI stuff that makes these cars look like they're in photo booths, but they're really not.
And AI it knows that, and it doesn't reward it. You need the lighting. You need
correct. And or cars like with rain on them, like chamois the car off, wipe the car down. Like make sure your cars look good when you recondition your car, when you merchandise your cars. Merchandising is really, really important. I think that's number one. Number two, probably more than anything else, is don't miss trades. Like, do not miss trades, period. Right? Like, you got one shot, whether you see the car or it's a sight unseen, you got one shot. Don't miss a trade, because if you don't get it, somebody down the street's going to get it.
That's right.
I think that's number two. Number three, if you're not trying to acquire cars from the public in your service drive or just quote unquote off the street, you're really missing it. And everybody says, well, it doesn't work. Well, it doesn't work for a lot of reasons. We could have a whole show about it, but really need to invest in your service drive and have a technology that's going to do it. Again, Auto Acquire is sponsoring this show, so I want to just bring that up. Like, it's important that you use technology like Auto Acquire to not just appraise the car that the customer may or may not want to trade or sell out of the service drive, but give them an offer on other cars that they own in their garage as well. And Auto Acquire offers the technology to do it. And there's other vendors out there that do as well. And last but not least, do a really good, thorough, proper appraisal and do it with the customer. Don't make it a mystery and don't make it something that the customer doesn't trust. And I'll leave it at that.
And I'm going to kick it over right away. And so it's funny, Todd, one thing you said was that, photos, wipe the car off if there's rain on it. And I think back to all those times, like the three of us, we've been in auction, we've stood in the auction lane, and there's a guy at the entry point of the auction on a rainy day with a squeegee, wiping the car off and taking all the rain off the car so you can see it when it rolls through the lane. And it amazes me that dealers won't wipe the car down before they take photos to put it online for a customer. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Brian, I'm going to kick it over to you. What would you say to a dealer? Advice that you would give going into 2026, things that they should rethink immediately and things that they absolutely should change right now.
Well, I think Todd hit all the main points. What I would build on from there, I would say they need to look at their website. And in 2026, the name of the game with AI is to simplify everything. You have to simplify the experience. You have to simplify how the customer, having them click too many places, not having a value my trade on the main homepage where they got to go find it in some drop downs or whatever. That's not a good UX. So if somebody wants to, know what their trade's worth and they have to go search for it, they're not the expert, they're not the authority, they're not going to get recommended. That's the first thing. The second thing is, we were talking a minute ago about look to book and that sort of thing. A lot of dealers have enjoyed many good years recently of retail, and they haven't been in the trenches and had to sit at the desk and just get into it, right? And things have changed. And the virtual deals, the sight unseen appraisals is where it's won or lost today. And if you're not supporting your managers as a dealer, and then you're not, or as a GM, and you're not, and you're still fixated on this look to book, even if you listen to, V Auto podcasts, they're saying the same thing we're saying, but there's a lot of dealers that, and I see a lot of dealers that I'll tell them, look, here's where you want to be. 50% trade capture. You sell 100 cars, you should have 50 trades. If not, it's a problem. You should be less than 10% missed trade percentage overall. If it's more than that, it's a problem, right? Most of them are over 20%, and most trade captures are 35% or less, but most people don't know it. Even the dealers that I do go through this with, and they're like, wow, that's really eye-opening. It's really revealing, right? And I said, oh, yeah. And then I talked to a used car manager 2 days later, and they go, yep, they just wore me out again about look to book. And that, my look to book dropped, and they said, yeah, that can't happen because there's so many other corporate stakeholders that are looking at these numbers that have comp plans tied to them and everything. I think that everybody needs to rethink how they're paying people. I'll land the plane with this. I just listened to this Lex Friedman, Jeff Bezos podcast, and Jeff Bezos said, now that he's left and he's looking back on Amazon, he said, one of the biggest things I would have changed, and one of the biggest mistakes that we made, is we hung on to legacy KPIs too long. And we got to the point where the KPIs became religion. And they were religion because of who came up with them. And I think that look to book is in the same boat, right? Dale's a legend and always will be in automotive retail. But in 2007, look to book meant something different than it means in 2026. And we haven't adapted that metric with the times, the way that Todd explained it earlier, that it needs to be expanded, right? And Bezos said that there was these heroes of Amazon, some of these pioneers that were early on with Prime and everything, that had come up with these metrics. And there was a thought process that come up with those metrics. And Bezos said, and I think it's the same with look to book, that Dale would say today, Bezos said, if you ask those same people today to solve that same problem, the metric would look different than it does. But so just because somebody who is an industry great comes up with a metric doesn't mean that it can't ever be modified and it can't ever be changed. You have to constantly, and the best, rethink the business and are constantly reinventing themselves, which is what Dale did with Viato the whole time he's there. He's constantly rethinking it, constantly reinventing it, and he was always wanting to disrupt himself. And I think that dealers aren't doing that enough. The final thing is the same thing we said about Carvana. The digital, I guess when they went through with tag and title, what they went through with all the disruption and all the change, what I went through with digital transformation and with look to book, dealers need to really think about the fact, and they say, why aren't we doing this? Or why is change not happening? How much, and this is just an honest, real question that most people don't care, because I wasn't primarily motivated by money. It's a byproduct, but it wasn't the primary thing. But that's not the case in all instances. And not everybody wants to move the industry forward. When you're taking a look to say, okay, if they do it my way or they do it their way, how much does it affect it? If they're making $20,000, $30,000 or more a month, and it affects their pay $1,000, $1,500 a month, do they really care? And are they willing to, for $1,500, push back on their meal provider? Or are they just going to manage the metric, like Todd said, and they're going to manage the KPI to what you're asking them to do because they don't want to lose out on the other 28.5? And I think that every dealer principal needs to ask themselves that. Do they want to fix the score or do they want to fix their store?
Whew. Do they want to fix the score or do they want to fix their store? Look, man, Brian, we appreciate you coming on for our first episode. This is the buy side where we get very, very real about what's going on in the industry and how you can go about fixing it. That is what our goal is over this year for the entire industry, is to drive the industry forward. Brian is our first guest, but look, tune in next week. We're going to have Glenn Lundy on the show. We have David Long coming on the show, Jason Rice coming on the show. We have Rob Dell and Rob Ruth coming on the show. So we have a lineup that of industry titans that all they want to do is work to change the industry. Brian, I appreciate it. You're a titan. You're a friend. Todd, always a pleasure. You and I are joined at the hip always. And guys, this is it. Episode 1 is at an end. I appreciate you guys. Have a fantastic week, everyone.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you guys for having me on. It's a privilege being the first.